Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, the show where Papa Tom spreads wisdom like a smear of cream cheese on an everything bagel. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
All right, everyone, welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast. And as promised, I have finally brought a guest to the podcast. And it's a great guest. I'll give him a bit of an introduction, and it's weird. I think I'll have to ask him once I get him on where we met, because I'm not 100% sure, but ultimately our paths crossed because one of my part-time vocations is as a music writer for the Niagara Gazette in Niagara Falls, New York. And I think I remember now I was assigned a story about him and another musician named Jamie Hoka and their long-term relationship and how they met at a pizza parlor, and years later Bruce and Jamie are two of the most beloved musicians in the Western New York area. And he's a humble guy, and he's listening to me say this, but it's true. It really is. But we're going to talk a little bit about, since it's really the theme of this particular podcast, it's not necessarily music related like some of the other things I've done, but it's more about hindsight and looking back and some of the lessons that you learn in terms of the struggles and the challenges that you face. And Bruce shared a story with me years back about a time that he was with a group called Klear. And before I say anything else about Klear, Klear's manager, I believe he was the manager, is a gentleman by the name of Rich Brown. And he passed away recently, so I'd like to dedicate this particular program to him and to his family. And, that being said, well, Klear was a band that was kind of on the precipice of fame. And some things happened, it didn't quite work out. But I think Bruce learned some lessons from it and still has some regrets that we'll discuss. But before I let Bruce come on and talk to us, I want to play a snippet of my favorite Bruce Wojick track. Let's hope this works. By a girl named Donna. She was a beauty queen. She was so damn mean. Wasn't a fighter, but a spirit of rock and roll. And I always knew in my rubber soul, and I always knew that I would never go. But I keep hanging on. Ah, yes, Bruce Wojick. You just keep hanging on. Man, I never, ever, ever get sick of that song. How are you, my friend?
Tom, that is, so awesome of you, because there's not many songs that I don't get sick of. There are a bunch.
For sure, but, that song, I keep hanging on. You know what I love about it? It's not just the whole... just the vibe and the energy. And I was blessed to have the opportunity to sing that with you on stage. We traded some verses and everything at the trial a few years back. One of my most treasured memories. And, but really what it speaks to is kind of the tenacity and having to be a full-time musician on any level requires a ton of tenacity. And I really admire you for that. I think you've carved out a great career for yourself. You're very well respected. You're loved as a person and as a musician. And I don't know. I'd like to, I guess, maybe start out with, where do you feel that you're at in your music career, and what level of satisfaction do you have?
Wow. But yes, you're correct. The lyric of that song is all about exactly what it is. Keep hanging on, no matter what. I mean, there's even a line in there about my band in the 90s. That's God's Children, that band is. And it's, what's it say in that line? It says, we were like one step away from doing something, and I maybe 3 steps away, right? Like,
yep.
You're sort of not as close as you think you might be. But as far as my, again, just amazing words for me, so I appreciate it. But yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for so long, and so many ups and downs and that kind of thing. And I've got some new music coming out too, and like I think I told you this recently in another conversation that I've sort of been procrastinating about putting that music out, and just sort of weird, obviously, just the state of affairs of just so many different things in the last last few years, obviously the pandemic and this and that, and not just that, but just some of the feelings that I have internally about stuff in general, and then just about the music business. I mean, the music business has changed so very much, as you know. And sometimes I'm not going to lie about it. Sometimes when I'm on my own and I'm thinking about the music business, it seems like that people just really, they only want something that they know from the past. Or, I mean, again, the way things travel and the way information travels, it is as crazy as and easier as it is to share things around the world and do all that kind of stuff. It sort of, in my mind, sometimes makes it. It seems like it makes it harder sometimes because the attention spans of people and the willingness to listen. To. I mean, again, Tom, you're like me. When we were growing up, we'd listen to a whole record. We'd get a record. We'd listen to the whole record a bunch of times, and I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that still happens, but it just seems like it seems to me like less of that than more of that. And I could be dead wrong, but at this point in my life, just the way that things are, it seems like that might be the case. And so, putting out music, it just seems like sometimes it could be so forgotten about, very easy, and again, I mean, radio is just a complete different animal than it was years ago, obviously, and just all of the above. So, as far as where I'm at right now and my satisfaction with it, feel really good and still positive about, creating and doing that kind of thing. But sometimes on the other side of the coin, I won't lie. I get a little discouraged sometimes, Does it make me want to stop and, quit and, I don't know if that's too harsh for a word, quit or, do something else or what have you. No, it hasn't made me go down that road, but sometimes it's I guess, like I said, discouraging sometimes. So I hate to, not trying to be a downer, but like sometimes it hits me in that way, and I yearn for times that are gone, that are not coming back, just the way that people listen to music, viewed music, appreciated music, the whole ball of wax, so to speak. So I know there's a long, convoluted answer, but that's sort of where I'm at right now in February. It's 2022.
And I appreciate the honesty. I mean, you've been at this for a long time. I mean, I'm going to ballpark it 30 years you've been doing this so far?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if not more. I mean, like, really seriously, like, yeah, from like 1990, pretty much on. Is that 30? Or is that 31? God almighty. Right?
Yeah, it's probably, yeah, so 30, 31. Yeah. I mean, I guess the good thing is you're not keeping count. I mean, 30 years at any one thing is kind of a miracle. It's amazing. But yeah, I appreciate you being honest about the ups and downs and where you're at. I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that people can relate to. We all set off on projects that, this podcast, for example, is something that certainly I hope that people listen to and it resonates with them. Otherwise, you feel like it's something about you that they're rejecting and not necessarily, I mean, like when you're saying, oh, I'm hesitant to put out this new music. I mean, is part of that feeling like, oh, what if nobody likes it? Or what if I just put it out and nobody listens to it?
Definitely more B, I know there are people that are going to dig it, as there always is. And I'm not saying that being arrogant by any means, but I mean, again, I have some, my kind of fan base, and, every band and artist has their fan base and their base of people that, is always going to enjoy sort of what they do, unless they totally are going in the left field and, and changing it up, so to speak, changing the style or what have you. But I think it's more B. I mean, like, not so much that, nobody's going to listen to it, but again, this world we live in, it's just weird where, I mean, my God, there's still so many great bands and so many great songs, and it's just, who's listening to those songs or where those songs are ending up, So, again, not trying to be negative, but just trying to process it all. And I think, what's crazy is that, as crazy as it sounds, like in 2022, as we sit here with technology and everything the way that it is, with our smartphones and all of the above, it's almost like sometimes I think I've got to go back to, like, really go back and go to a absolute grassroots. It's always grassroots, you know that, and I know that, but it always go back to this really grassroots thing, and, just worry about more of a smaller base, so to speak, than trying to crack the code, as we always, in the 90s and in the early 2000s and so forth. I mean, again, even in the early 2000s, back to the Klear band, the band Klear that I was in that you mentioned in the beginning, I mean, that we were still before, I mean, YouTube was out, but it wasn't anything like it is today. I don't think all the platforms were, I mean, again, even close to where they are today, the streaming platforms. So you still, like, radio at that time was still a huge vehicle. And again, it's very different today, very different today. I mean, I don't know. And again, I'm not going around the country, going to every market and large or small and listening to radio and doing that kind of thing. But I mean, I would guess, educated guess, hypothesis, that nobody is, like, it seems like nobody's getting behind any local stuff anymore. It seems that way to me, or, really regional thing, and like really taking a risk with it and trying to, with radio, or, again, I think it's more like you're all on your own now with all these platforms and all these easy ways to do all this stuff. And it's like, you're on your own, you know what I mean? Which you've always been on your own, Tom. You know that, and I know that. Every band's always been on their own. But it seems like, I mean, hey, there was not a lot of development 30 years ago, but a lot more development of an artist even then than there is now. I mean, it just seems that way to me. But what's your thoughts?
Well, and it's interesting too. You bring up so many great points, and you and I have a fascinating perspective in that we both have kids that are out there trying to do some original stuff and something that's unique, and they're in the Western New York area. And I'm sure that you're giving your kid advice and I give my kid advice, but like you said, the medium changes so quickly. It's hard to even know if the advice that you're giving them is relevant to today's music scene. But I agree with you. I mentioned in a Facebook post recently about this concept of exposure bucks, where bands are expected to play for exposure, opening up for somebody or taking a gig for next to nothing, if not nothing. And it's even harder as a band that's playing original music, because if people don't know your music, they probably aren't going to come out and see you. And it felt like that there was a period of time, even on the national level. I use the example of Kiss. Kiss used to take out Kiss or Styx, Rush, all these different bands as their opener and kind of help them along in their career. But there just doesn't seem to be the kind of national acts that even want to bring out these new acts out on tour with them to build a new audience for them. I mean, AC/DC, I mean, they were an opening act almost up until the time that Bon Scott died.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, most of the packages as far as shows, I mean, they're all right. I mean, most of them are all going for, stuff that they're trying to maximize on people in the seats, as they always have. And you know that, and I know that too. So I don't want to speak like I'm being ignorant to that. I'm totally aware of that. But again, going back to square one, just the development of any, new stuff. And you know what? I don't know. I don't have a pulse on everything. So somebody could listen to this podcast and be like, oh my God, well, what are you talking about? There's X, Y, and Z that you're not even thinking about. And I get that. But it just seems to me at this point in the game, in the music biz, that, first of all, it's all playing live now. I mean, that's where you're making your money. I mean, it's quite evident that that's what it is. I know some people are still selling a lot of records, I'm sure in the hip hop genre, and, like really crazy pop, genre and, that kind of thing, but, I just, I don't think that, I don't think it's, what? That brings me to a point. Going back to playing live, you know what? This is what I tell my son in the band, 77 Stone. I tell them, and this really hasn't changed in a way, but you know what? If you can go, you go to markets around the country, and you can get, you get 200 people to buy a ticket to come and see you play everywhere you go. I mean, if you can do that, you're successful. Without any, again, somebody might listen who doesn't really know the biz and go, oh, well, what are you talking about? I mean, what about 2000 or what about, this and that? Well, I mean, again, you know what? There's a lot of stuff that happens in each market, and again, if you can get somebody to know what you're doing, and again, get 200 people to come and see you play in all these different markets, you're doing something, and you do that consistently. There's so many artists that people that are in a mid-level thing, as you know and I know, that some people have no idea who they are. A lot of people do on the other side of the coin, but I mean, again, I don't want to start naming, people, but it's hard, man. It's hard unless you're, a retro act, a nostalgia kind of thing, or again, one of these huge acts in hip hop and, some of the pop stuff. I'm trying to think. I don't even know. See, I'm so just removed from some of this stuff. But like, what's the Japanese 5 boy band thing going on? What is that happening? They're in the commercials and stuff for the cell phone.
Thankfully, I don't remember the name of it. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's.
Again, I've been so far away from something like that in any band or anything I've ever done, But like, I know that stuff is extremely successful, but it's just like, hey, we were chatting about the Black Crowes real fast before we started doing this, and they're like, still, I was talking with somebody else a while back. There was a band we were doing All Black Crowes thing and we had a show a couple months ago. We hadn't had one in a while, but we were like, that band never were an arena band. I mean, they could do a festival with other people, but am I wrong in the fact that they were, never could do, No, am I wrong?
Well, it's interesting. I feel like, and maybe, I'm a big Todd Rundgren fan, and I think it was maybe an article where someone talked to Todd, and I think Black Crowes falls in the same category in the sense that if you foster, you said 200 people, you can play bars 200 people across the country and make a really good living, potentially six figures a year. But you get these guys like Todd Rundgren who, Flounders 500, whatever, or Black Crowes, which at one point were 2,000-3,000 until recently, they started to capitalize on Shake Your Money Maker and all that. But their concentration was, we'll build a fan base, we'll nurture just that fan base and not worry about the greater collective consciousness of music. But
exactly.
Even going back to the beginning, I mean, where did the Black Crowes get their break? I mean, it's harder. We've got 2 kids. And you love to just say, hey, get in a van and drive places. When I was, I don't remember how old I was, probably in my late 20s, I was working at a club where this band literally just showed up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and said, hey, man, can we set up and play for 3 hours because we're driving and we don't have a gig right now. We just want to play. And that band was Widespread Panic. I mean, that's what they were doing to build their reputation. Spin Doctors kind of did the same thing. So there's a lot of these road dogs that had clubs that they could hit to in every market. I think that scene may still exist in Chicago, New York City, wherever. But what band is going to show up in Buffalo and just have a place that they can do a pop-up gig or even gig with anybody else? I mean, but like you said, Bruce, we're a little bit older, so maybe there's a part of the scene that we just don't understand or even aren't even a part of.
Yeah, and I ask myself that. I do. And I don't know the answer to it. I mean, I would assume the answer is yes. There's some, but again, talking like about our kids, talking about the boys, and they haven't given me any revelatory like band that, oh my God, that I've never heard of, that's like doing just tremendous, that kind of thing. I mean, again, it all goes back to playing live in 2022 and for the past how many years now. I mean, again, it's, who buys a record and listens to the whole thing? Again, not trying to be negative. And number 2, I mean, coming to town. I mean, playing live is, like you said, if you can do 200 people in each market around the country consistently, you can make a damn good living and be a successful artist, you know. But yeah, it's, you know, I guess I was going back to the Black Crowes thing about how they weren't an arena band.
Right.
I mean, they never sort of graduated. Now, again, one of my all-time favorites, right? You as well. Like,
Yep.
I mean, dude, I remember when that came out. Holy cow, that was like the best thing. It was Stonesy. It was like the Faces. It was like Humble Pie. It was like, it just spoke to me like more than so many things at the time. I was like, this is the best thing. Still, when I listen to that stuff, it is absolutely amazing music to me. You know, amazing. Just speaks to me, and like I say, I just don't. You know, you got your huge artists, your Metallicas, and your all these huge artists and so forth. And again, you do have a lot of artists that what we're not mentioning that do that. 200 people, 400 people go around the country and so forth like that. But I guess it just seems like everybody just doesn't have the capacity with the way that it all happens and travels and all of that stuff. It just seems that way, that people don't have the capacity to really follow along with something, really pay attention to something, really, you know, share stuff. I mean, it's just different. It's just a different world, you know. And you got to you got to make it work for yourself, right? I mean, you can't. I mean, I don't want to go down a road and think, you know, you got to make it work. You gotta do what you have to do to make it work if you want to be a musician / artist and do your thing. You got to make it work. So you got to find a way, as you always have. I mean, things change. They always did. Things changed from Elvis in the 50s to, you know, the 60s, 70s. I mean, everything always changes. So you got to make it work. But I can't lie. Sometimes it sort of brings me down where I'm just like, man, you know, it's just so different. And, you know, you have all these amazing things that you can share your music on and do this and that, but so does everybody else as well, right? And I think that's the thing. When we were younger, you know, there wasn't that. And like, you know, the bands that got deals or had good independent record label deals or started their own label and did well, I mean, it's just different, you know, so...
And that'll transition us nicely into, because we're at about the 23-minute mark, so try to go about another 10 minutes. So let's talk about the Klear story. I know you and I, when Klear reformed, you kind of gave me a little bit of backstory that I didn't know in terms of your regrets and whatnot. Lead singer is a guy named Fred Schaefer, I believe, and Fred was, I mean, I only got to see them after the initial run, you and them, I should say, and man, you know, the guy had a great stage presence, and the band had incredible chemistry on stage, and you tried to kind of do that reboot in, I think it was 2015, but what happened with the initial run, and how, you know, what are the pieces of that you're still kind of hanging on to for, you know, to kind of coin your song lyric, and what were the lessons and the takeaways from that? Well,
2015, 2016, actually. I think it was 2016 when we actually recorded a record and we put it out called Eyes Wide Open. And it was like half new tracks and then half some live archived kind of stuff, like a couple tracks from CBGB, a performance in the early 2000s, one from Darien Lake, I believe, here opening up for the Goose, and one from the Viper Room in Hollywood when we played there in 2002. And you know, to make it short, and I'm not going to make it short, you know, I'm going to expand forever, but you know, when you get far away, first of all, we had two other singers after Fred. So we had, you know, there was two other versions of the band, so to speak. And then you go back to the original singer, and I think, first of all, you know, people move on. They get older, and they, you know, they're doing their things with their lives as we all do. And so I think a lot of the fan base actually, you know, sort of, they forget, you know, and then you try to give them reminders and this and that, and, you know, hey, you know, you're not Van Halen the Rolling Stones. You don't have that kind of bass that's just going to like be with you all the way. I mean, like the Stones, right? Charlie dies. Hey, we're good. Next week, show's on. Let's go. Which, I mean, I get it. I do, but so I just think a lot of people, sort of moved on, when we put that record on in 2016. And shame because, man, so proud of that record. Sounded great. I thought the songs were great. I thought the extra stuff, as I mentioned, the live tracks, and there was even a cover of "Cuts Like a Knife" by Bryan Adams that Robbie Takak, of course, who signed us to his label there years back. He had us do. He had an idea to do that song. We never put it out, so we popped that on there too. But I think people just moved on, and it just was not what we were expecting it to be. I mean, again, we weren't expecting it to reinvent the wheel with it, but so it was, we did a couple shows, and then it just seemed like, maybe we'll just put this to bed for a while, and I never say things are absolutely done. I always leave doors open. I try not to shut them. So, I mean, who knows what could happen in the future and with whom. But yeah, it was lackluster, when we did that, and we were hoping that, we could rekindle some of that kind of thing. And, again, we did some shows. They were okay. I mean, the band played well, but I mean, they weren't, sold out shows. And, so it's hard, it's hard when you lose. And Tom, and I know, I mean, again, people want the guys and the original members of the band. I mean, they just do, and I know the singer's the most important one in all the band equations that we can talk about through the years. But still, I mean, just people, when you like something, could be a food, right? One little piece of that recipe that's gone away, and it's not the same. And you know what? We're creatures of habit. We like what we like, and so yeah, it was tough, and but we'll see what happens in the future with it. But yeah, that was the deal, And just a footnote on Klear, going back to the music business and everything we were talking about is, like I said earlier, when we were rolling and things were going amazing before Fred left the band, we were like in the last little couple years there, I think, of actually, having a really great opportunity to get a single on the radio and having different markets pick it up and so forth. Because again, it was before all of what we know sort of today with all the streaming platforms. Again, some of them were out, but they weren't huge. YouTube was out, but it wasn't what it was. I don't even know if Facebook was out at that point, if it was just beginning in its infancy. But so sometimes I think, man, we missed that opportunity. We could have capitalized on that. And then on the other side too, if we could have kept going, then I think we could have capitalized on utilizing all that stuff, the platforms and the social media and that kind of thing. Obviously MySpace was around back then, but that came and went pretty fast. But yeah, so that was the deal with that last run at the Klear stuff in 2016.
And just so people have a little background, because, I mean, the part that I always found interesting was that first run. Now, Fred Schaefer was your original lead singer. You were signed to a record label, Robbie Takak. In case anybody doesn't know, he's the half of the Goo Goo Dolls. I mean, John Resnick and Robbie are the two. Robbie still has a Buffalo presence. And this was Robbie's record label, if I remember correctly. And you guys were there. And Fred decided to leave the band. I mean, and that kind of took away your momentum. And I mean, you have every right to be upset about that. I mean, I think it's a tough situation. I mean, and I'm almost wondering how you and Fred were able to resolve some of those feelings and even get back on stage together.
I mean, honestly, I don't think it ever really goes away, but as time passes, as humans are, and time passes, you even myself, I wanted to get back to what we had, I honestly wanted to get back to that lineup of that, and hear him singing those songs again and play with him again and so forth. And then, you know, as you've heard a million times in band stories and stories about bands and things like that, the same stuff sort of creeps up, right? You know what I mean? Like that sort of stuff that sort of happens to make the band split sort of creeps up again, you know? And, but, you know, and again, I told you this before, you know, the truly tough at the time because, you know, if your band is not doing well and things are going in the tank and you can just feel it happening all around you, shit's just not working out, it's not happening, you know, that's one situation where you can see somebody going, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm going to do something else or what have you. But that wasn't the case with us. You know, nothing could have been further from the truth with that. We were like really doing amazingly well. I mean, Robbie was going to, you know, push a single on the radio and spend a lot of money to do that. And I mean, literally he was going to do that the next day after Fred came in and said, you know, I'm gonna quit or stop or what have you. And so it was just such a hard pill to swallow, you know. And you know, and again, we felt it. We all felt it. I felt it tremendously. Just like with Fred, again, being the singer and frontman, and he was the main writer. We all wrote, but he was the main writer, and it was just tough to take because it was just like, man, we're right in the middle of the game here. You know what I mean? Like this is not the time to do this, right? So that's, as I told you before, that's the thing that I always felt myself as like I don't want to say the leader, you know, like sort of like the coach, the guy who tries to keep it all together, keep everything together. I mean, because Fred was younger as well. He was the youngest guy in the band. So I was just trying to keep it all together, make it all good, and, you know, keep plowing forward, that kind of thing. And you know, so just really tough to take. But, you know, what are you going to do? You got to plow forward. That's what we did. We got another guy to sing, and you know, we wrote about over 20 songs, and you know, gave them to Robbie and said, hey man, you know, I know it's different, but what do you say? Let's just try to keep going here. And he said, you know what? Yeah, some of these songs are really freaking good, man. Let's do that. So we did, and went and recorded, and before we could even put that record out, you know, that guy flaked out as well, the singer that we had. I mean, it's just crazy, man. And so we ended up firing him and then got another singer. And again, you know, when you do that, you know, I don't care what band you are, you know, not every band can be Van Halen. Again, First of all, you have huge success. And hey, you know and I know, I mean, if they would have got some, you know, look at the Gary Sharon thing, right? It always just comes up in the Van Halen thing, you know. Geez, I like that record. It's a nice record with Gary. They wrote some great songs on there, you know. But people just throw it in the tank every time, you know. I mean, you know, Sammy, it was great, but yeah, you know, it's the common tale, right, Tom? It's a common tale. So
yeah, absolutely. I you know, and it's interesting because you mentioned before, you know, a change can really reverberate with the fan base, but it's really seems like it's one way or the other. You talk about a Charlie Watts, he dies, they just throw in another drummer, Steve Jordan, who's a great drummer, by the way, but it feels like once the band has the catalog established, they can pretty much go out with the cousin of the first roadie and people will go to the show. But you have to get to the point where you're at that, where people will just not even pay attention anymore. They just know the songs. They don't even know the band members.
I think that's a huge point that I've got to touch on. I think you're entirely right. But when you're a band in the middle there that hasn't graduated to, that's the thing that kills you, sort of, right? Again, if you're established, Foreigner, Rolling Stones, any of these bands, you know what I mean? I'm just thinking there's so many of them that have different personnel now. It's easy, right? I mean, you know, in theory, it's easy, right? Get some other guys. You got these great songs. Everybody knows these songs. But when you're still pushing forward and plowing forward, trying to become a household name, that's a tough spot to do it in, you know. And so you have your fan base that is, smaller, and they love what they love, like what they like, and that's what makes it hard, That's what makes it hard. And then again, people get older, they move on with their lives, and then you come back on X years later, how many years later, and you're like, hey, we put on a record, and we want you to get back in the same mindset you were. Let's see, from 2004 to 2016. What's that? How many years? I'm terrible with math.
It's a lot. 85? That's all that matters.
A lot, right? Yeah, you were like, well, we don't know the equation, but I mean, right? I mean, again, if somebody was 25 in 2004, all those years later, I mean, my God, your life could be so different at that time, right? You got some kids, I don't feel like, going out tonight, man. I'm going to sit home and do X, Y, or Z. But that's what makes it tough, in that situation for any band, not just us at the time, but.
I can only think of one band off the top of my head that was able to have a tale of they kind of were there and then everything fell apart and that's Anvil. I mean, and that was because of a documentary. So it was just such an oddity that they were, and the great thing is that the story made for a great documentary, and then people all of a sudden went back and discovered the music, but they still had their two main guys. So even there, like you said, I mean, there's something to be said for. And I think there's something to be said for chemistry too. And like you said, you bring in another lead singer, and on some level you must have had a little less confidence in them. And that's not a reflection on them at all. It's just the reality of the situation. And then the same thing with the other person. And even the pressure of being a lead singer coming into a band that's already established. You mentioned Van Halen. I mean, Sammy Hagar, he had a honeymoon period, but the reality was at some point he had to come to the realization that wasn't his band. That was the Van Halen brothers band, and they were the ones that called the shots. And even up until the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, where it's like, hey man, it's my band, Sam. We love what you did, but
I got to stop you because just real fast. Just a footnote on Anvil. Just a bizarre thing about Anvil. My band in the '90s, which was God's Children, the first national band that we ever opened up for. And we were thrilled out of our minds, like we got a spot on supporting somebody that's, national, was Anvil. So it was the first band we ever opened up for in Buffalo at a place, was it Wise Guys or something, a club called Wise Guys? Anyway, so years later, speaking of Klear, this is not in our initial period of success from, say, 2000 to 2004 or 2005, but was it in the 2015 or somewhere around there? I think it was. We have Fred back, so we have, like we mentioned, we've been talking about that period of time, 2015, 2016, and we get a gig opening up for Alice Cooper, and who's on the bill?
Yep.
Anvil. So it's Alice Cooper, Anvil, and us at Klear, right? And so don't we end up hanging out with those guys? And, it's crazy because me and not Lips is the singer, the drummer, I can't recall his name, super sweet guy, right? He goes, hey, you got any rolling papers? I'm like, yeah, I actually did. I had some papers in my bag.
Goodness.
So we have, we sit in our van, and we get stoned and we talk about stuff. And I was asking him about, again, how's things going? I mean, because the documentary, if I'm correct, that came out right about that period of time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're in a little bit of a rehash. And then, I said, hey, just crazy enough, first thing we ever did, first band we ever opened national was you guys, this band. Of course, he didn't remember that. Don't expect him to, but I just had to. It's just funny you mentioned that. But and I use one of the lines from the documentary all the time. I use it with my son's band. I use it in all kinds of situations. And that line is, Tom, you know what the line is? That's dedication, pal.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Yeah, it was fun. I was at that show, and I got backstage. I met Alice. I met the guys from Anvil, and I actually remember them seeking out somebody that had rolling papers, and I'm just now realizing that was you. So
That was me, man.
it's funny, but yeah, and
I had the old pack of zigzags in the little compartment of my backpack. So, but you know, and another little weird thing is that, speaking of bands that sort of, you know, they get close and don't really explode, but you know, one of the guitar players in Alice Cooper's band at the time, was Damon.
Damon Johnson.
Damon.
Yeah.
Damon Johnson.
Yeah, he was getting near the end. He was actually complaining to me backstage about working with Alice, and he wanted to get out. And I think Orianthi was coming in, and now he's with Leonard Skinner. Did you know that?
I had 2 seconds talking to Damon, and I said, "Hey, man, I just want you to know I am a huge Brother Kane fan, because he was in a band called Brother Kane that came out in the 90s,
yep,
I believe, and their first record is one of my favorite records. And again, you know, one of those bands, right? Like, you know, you ask a lot of people about Brother, not really. Probably have to, you know, only certain people are going to remember that, or remember the most popular song, which was "Got No Shame." But just a crazy biz, man. And yeah, Tom, been doing it for so long, you know, and still enjoy it when things go great. You know, they're just great, like anything else, right? Anything that you do in your life, you know? And when things are shitty, you know, then things are sort of shitty. But it seems like it's a harder code to crack nowadays. I don't know if anybody is going to become, you know, like Van Halen, or like just something huge. If it's not, I hate to say it, if it's not a hip hop thing, or if it's not a, you know, like that pop kind of thing, like that. Like I said, I don't know, the Japanese boy thing, or something like that. Whatever that is, there's just so many. You know, I hope I'm wrong. You know, but I mean, again, U2 and just all these amazing Guns N' Roses, all these things. I just don't. I don't know. I don't know if it's gonna happen again. I'm sure it will, but it's tough. I don't know if it will.
Well, and you know what? We'll wrap up on, like you said, an optimistic note. I mean, you've got a great career. You got Strictly Hip is doing very well, and your solo work, and then hopefully get some new music out soon. But you know, you don't necessarily have to be the most popular guy around in terms of music to put together a nice living at it. And I know that your fans appreciate you. I'm one of them. My wife's definitely one as well.
I love you both.
You know, and if nothing else, it gave us the opportunity you and I to meet. So, and I know that you've made a lot of friends in the music industry, and you just make a lot of friends out in the world. You're a friendly guy. We're both, and we came together because of music, and music really is the common denominator that I believe brings people together, as opposed to so many other things which really cause division. And ironically, we've talked about divisions in bands and all that other stuff. But as I said, ultimately, it all works out for everybody, and I think we kind of land in the place where we're meant to be. And when this podcast becomes the next, you know, as popular as Joe Rogan, then, of course, Bruce, you can say you were an early guest. The first guest, as a matter of fact.
Sure. And then I'll be a guest as well. And we can talk about, at that point, we can talk about more food item-driven conversation.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
We can talk about anything but music, yes.
Right. So. You know, but I just want to say last thing. Number one, I love you dearly. You know, I love you and your wife dearly. I've known you guys for years now, and so appreciate your support and your love for what I do. And love the fact that you had me on the show today. Really appreciate it. And number three, shameless plug, and just reiterating the fact that by no means am I being ultra negative about music today. It's just different, and right. Things change. All things change in life. That's one thing, right? Well, I'm sure you tell your son. I tell my son the same thing. Nothing stays the same. Things change. You got to adapt. You got to shift and shake with it, man. That's just the way that it goes. You got to find a way, right? Find a way. And again, in music, like you say, if you can find a way to make a living doing it, something you love doing, that's the way to do it, right? No matter how you do it, what way you do it, find a way. That's an amazing thing if that's what you want to do. So I think there's a lot of amazing positive stuff yet to come. And again, I do have all this new music too, so everybody look for it. It'll be on. Hey, ready for this? It'll be on all the streaming platforms, Tom.
where my podcasts are all located as well on all the streaming platforms.
Right, on all the streaming platforms. So
that should be the name of your next band, all streaming platforms. So that'll be fascinating. We'll form something. But anyhow, Bruce, thank you so much. It was a great time. We always have great conversations, whether we're recording them for a podcast or not. So everybody, I encourage you to check out Bruce's music and go see him perform live if you're in the Western New York area. And of course, support your local musicians and do what you can. It's been a tough couple of years for them. And just, keep hanging on, as my good friend Bruce says. All right?
That's it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thom.
And this is the Bagel Logic Podcast. We will see you next week.
Thom, thank you. Love you much, man.
All right. See you, Bruce.
Take care. Bye-bye.